So welcome everybody. I know people are still kind of trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started in service of kind of keeping to our time. I'm Charity O'Connor. I'm the graduate assistant for off-campus student life at UMass. And I'm here with John. I'll let you introduce yourself really quickly.
Hi, I'm John Thompson. I'm a building inspector and health inspector and the senior code enforcement officer for the town of Amherst. And my main focus is off-campus rental housing, the health and safety of that.
Yeah, awesome. Great. So just a couple quick reminders to begin. Participants are muted, so we're in a webinar format, which means you'll stay muted. The meeting is being recorded, so we can share it with others who aren't able to be here. While the chat feature is disabled, you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions or share thoughts. And so at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to go through those questions and make sure we get some of them answered. So we're so glad you're here. Thank you for coming. I'll go ahead and share my screen so I can show the PowerPoint. Awesome, cool. So take time before you sign. This is a presentation we do with parents, we do with students, we do with a lot of different audiences. So some of it is sort of geared at students, but I know, we have primarily parents in the audience and maybe some students too. So hopefully this is helpful. So just starting off talking about the off-campus student center. So again, that's where I work, and that's located in 103 Bartlett Hall. And so our actual kind of physical space is a place where students can, off-campus students can sort of treat it as a hub. And so we know a lot of times off-campus students get kind of stranded on campus. They don't want to go back home in between classes. So this is a great place to study, to hang out, to ask questions of our staff. We have a refrigerator and a microwave and locker rentals. So it's a really good place to kind of set up for the day. So in terms of looking for housing off campus, these are sort of the checklist items that we talk about with students and kind of recommend you talking about with your student. So the first thing is, and we'll talk about this in a little more depth, is to log on to our off-campus housing site. And so this is one of the best places to look for off-campus housing. So a lot of the local rental agencies and management companies will list on that site. And you can search based on different filters or criteria, cost, access to bus lines, distance from campus. So that's a really helpful tool. And we'll go into some recommendations about how to use that more effectively. Completing the Living Off Campus certification. So our website, different from the off-campus housing.umass, just the off-campus student center site has information and links to the Living Off Campus certification. So it's just a kind of a Moodle course that students can learn some basics about living off campus. Can be really helpful. Obviously we suggest students have conversations with their family and figure out their budget and their financial situation. So what is really affordable? And so that's a really important first step. And then it's about finding housemates if they don't have them already. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And then checking, of course, the lease terms and making sure everything looks okay. So as far as the housing site, this is the URL. You can, maybe someone can put it in the chat at some point, but yeah, as I said, you can look at listings, message boards, you can favorite any particular complexes or apartments that you might be interested in. You can also find housemates on there. So we always recommend students actually make an account and log in. So you will be able to browse anonymously, but you get access to all of, a lot more information such as roommate profiles and that kind of thing if you actually log in. So we recommend that. And you can set up your own roommate profile. So yeah, so it's really helpful. So you'll see on the homepage this little screenshot. The student will want to select UMass Amherst students, faculty, and staff. And so they'll sign up with their net ID. Yeah, so the Living Off Campus certification I sort of mentioned. It may be required by some landlords. It's highly recommended by the university. It's super quick and easy to complete and very low stakes. So it's really just a learning tool for students, and would probably be helpful for you as parents as well. So the talking to your family piece is often talking to you all, and so part of that is figuring out if they'll be required to have a co-signer, which for many students that is required and typically ends up being a parent or family member. So that's an important conversation just to have, about what that will look like. What are the responsibilities of everybody? We'll go into a little bit later different kinds of lease setups like joint and several liability, which would have implications for you as a co-signer. So something to really pay attention to if you're co-signing is who is responsible for what amount of rent, right, in different scenarios. Checking finances. So as you all, I'm sure know, there are a lot of upfront costs to moving off campus. So most landlords will ask for first, last, and a security deposit. There are some brokerage fees or finder's fees in the area, depending on if you're going through a particular agency. So that could be a potential additional cost. And then thinking about the monthly rent, and in particular, any variable costs like utilities. So really being clear, is are utilities included? Is which are, which aren't? What could I maybe expect to pay, and how does that split between me and my roommates? That kind of thing. So our website has a ton of resources. The site that you log into and look for housing has a resources tab, and there's a ton of information on there that's really helpful. And so there are some money and finances tips on there. So we just updated this last month. Prices are unfortunately going up. It's unfortunate, and it's sort of where we're at right now. So these are averages. As you can see, it's financially savvy to be able to split rent with a roommate, of course, and to have utilities included when it's possible. But it is important to note, as far as like town bylaws, no more than 4 unrelated people per rental in Amherst and 5 in Hadley. So I know, we know sometimes students will kind of cram into a place, and I'm sure John could speak to this more, but really being, of course, mindful about safety and the bylaws. So in terms of starting to search, this is a little snapshot of what you might see when you log in. And you can see at the top all of those filters. So number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. And so we recommend starting with fewer filters just to get a sense of everything that's out there. And then starting to narrow down once you have a kind of lay of the land. And so the helpful thing about the site is you can also set alarms to be notified if a new place is listed. So just, the place where we're at right now is that housing is a little competitive and it's hard to find. And so being persistent and checking often, right, and setting up those alarms can really help you be ahead of the game as far as when new things become available. So finding your housemates or your students' housemates, obviously it's a big thing to figure out, and our roommate profiles can help a lot just in terms of providing some information to be able to determine if it's going to be a good fit or not. And the nice thing is about our site too, you're logging in, students are logging in with their net ID. So it's, verified UMass Amherst students, and other people who are not students can't see those profiles. So that's a really nice consideration. And then consider signing a housemate agreement, so just outlining some basic terms of how the space will be shared, who's responsible for what. And I think we have some sample housemate agreements on our site, so feel free to check those out. We're also always, we're available 9 to 5 weekdays. And so if students or you want to stop by or call to ask additional questions or help navigating the site, we can also definitely help with that. So I think these are some pretty straightforward things I'm sure we can all relate to in terms of cohabitation or living with someone. Thinking about habits and compatibility. I think oftentimes undergraduates will live with undergraduates and graduate students will live with graduate students. If there's mixing, of course, that's totally fine, but it is just a thing to consider about, where is each person at in their life and in their career at UMass? Are they compatible in terms of habits, staying up late or going to bed early, that kind of thing. Of course, financial reliability, communication style, resources, again, are available on our site, and then the housemate agreement. So we've gone over a couple of these things, but in terms of finding the right place, again, what are the priorities? So really thinking about transportation, I think, is a big one, especially in the Pioneer Valley. If you're in Sunderland, Amherst, Northampton, typically buses are pretty available, but certainly the routes and times are something to pay attention to. And buses are free for students, but if you, for some reason, get further out from Northampton, often the bus is no longer free. Likewise, if a student is commuting, that's something to be thinking about. How long is that commute with traffic? What's realistic? How soon? What are my earliest classes? All those kinds of considerations. History matters. So you can use the Amherst property search tool on the town's website to find out about previous noise complaints or housing code violations. So really helpful just to get a sense of like what has gone on here before, both as far as housing code violations and safety, but also just what is the perception and relationship of this house with the houses or neighbors around it. Inspect smart. So of course, as much as possible, if it's doable, go in person, bring someone with you. We always tell students, but to inspect it before you sign the lease. We do have an inspection worksheet on our site, so we highly recommend before and then after you sign the lease, going and making very detailed notes about the condition of the apartment. Get everything in writing. I think especially when students or you are paying rent, if for any reason you're paying in cash or really any method, it's really helpful, to have a paper trail. So getting receipts, getting any agreements, of course the lease, but any other kinds of agreements with the landlord in writing. And yeah, what utilities will you pay, all of those kinds of details. And then take your time. I know feels hard to sit with because I think people are feeling a lot of urgency around finding housing. And so I can totally appreciate that. And we want people to not get into any kind of situation that's questionable. So it's a fine balance. Finding the right lease. So of course, many of you know, but helpful we always try to remind students to, a lease is a contract, and it's a legally binding contract. So we want to be really thoughtful about kind of going through the lease. I know, at least for me, I don't have a lot of expertise in leases or law at all. So, typically we would suggest that students have student legal services review their leases. Unfortunately, at the moment, the housing attorney is on leave. So in lieu of that, we, again, have lots of resources related to things to look out for in a lease on our website, some of which were prepared, as you can see, even this one, by off-campus student life and student legal services. So there are histories of kind of what they recommend and things to look out for that you can check out. Let's see. Yeah, I think we went to most of those. Again, thinking about upfront costs, security deposit. I think legal fees is a good one to pay attention to. So, your landlord cannot charge you for an application fee, a credit check fee, an initial pet deposit. or a fee for not paying your rent on time unless it's later than 30 days. So getting receipts, asking a lot of questions, documenting, all the kind of basics. I think we went over most of this. Taking pictures is really helpful, so you can fill out the statement of conditions, but taking pictures at the same time and just keeping them in a safe place so you have documentation in addition to that statement of conditions form. Making all requests for repairs in writing. So, you know, having a paper trail again, just making sure to kind of protect yourself or the student to protect themselves, and making those communications. So I mentioned student legal services, unfortunately, but again, check out our website. And just a note, I know a lot of students in the summer may need to sublease their apartment. And so some complexes and some landlords allow that and some don't. So thinking ahead about if I'm going to need to sublease, let me make sure I'm asking that up front, that that's okay. It's unfortunate, right, when students kind of get stuck in a lease over the summer if they're not there or they're traveling abroad, studying abroad, you know, so being mindful to think about those things. So I mentioned joint and several liability. Essentially what it means is that you are agreeing that each tenant is fully responsible for the full amount of rent and for fulfilling all conditions of the lease. So what that means in practice is that if there's 4 students living in an apartment and one of them leaves unexpectedly or drops out and doesn't pay any of the rent, right? It means the other 3 people are responsible for making that portion up. You know, so that's something just to really be mindful of. Of course, you know, in an ideal situation, you would be able to get a great new roommate in pretty quickly and kind of figure that out. But in the meantime, unfortunately, the rest of the roommates are responsible for that. So think about that when you're looking at leases, and definitely something to ask about and just consider again with co-signing. If you're co-signing just for your student's portion or are you co-signing for the entire portion? Yeah, so I know that was really quick. I'm gonna hold off on questions again until the end, but John is gonna go through some helpful information with us from his perspective with the town, which is really, yeah, gonna be super helpful. So thank you.
So I'm John Thompson. I work for the town of Amherst. In my previous career, I was a carpenter, custom home builder and remodeler in the Valley. And 10 years ago, the town of Amherst advertised a new position in their inspections department. They wanted someone who could be a building inspector, a health inspector, and focus on the health and safety of off-campus rental housing. So the position didn't exist, and I was intrigued by it. I was ready to make a change. I applied for the job, and they hired me. So I got to help create the position, and you know, have stayed with it. It's interesting work. It was quite a bit different from my previous work, you know, where you walk away from a construction project at the end of the day and you can see what you did. There's a tangible thing there. It was a few weeks doing this before I realized, you know, a parent called and thanked me for helping their student out, and I realized, oh, that's how you know that you did something. I've got a slideshow I'll share with you here. So when I first started the job, we did not have a rental registration program, and it was hard to find out who owned a lot of properties in town. They're often owned by out of town, out of state, and sometimes out of country entities. And it was difficult to get in touch with them when I needed to. The town set up this program requiring all properties to be annually permitted, and they renew that. We've had 7 successful renewal periods to date, and there's currently about 1,200 properties permitted. So that's single family homes, multifamily homes, and apartment complexes. It's about 5,000 units of rental housing. A big piece of what we do is code enforcement. And as I said, it's building and health and also zoning that I enforce. And the stuff that we deal with breaks out like that. Most of it's building complaints and violations. And when we don't get action on our orders, we issue tickets. This is the kind of thing that we see. This is not uncommon. You know, the trash gets out of hand. The neighbors call and complain about it. There's several ways that we receive complaints. We get calls, we get electronic complaints through our website. Parking on the lawn. Cars are supposed to be in the driveway. This is often indicative of an overcrowding situation too. There's no place for the extra car, so it ends up on the lawn. You know, smoke detectors being removed, covered, bagged. We see that all the time. Upholstered furniture on porches. Upholstered furniture is responsible for a lot of fatal fires in the United States, and we have a zero tolerance about upholstered furniture on the porch. So you can imagine, you know, your students sit out there at midnight and they're smoking, and then they go into bed, and it takes a little while, but the couch bursts into flame, and now the porch and the means of egress are engulfed in flame, and there's no way out. It's a really bad situation, and we you know, see it every day and take immediate action when we do. Couches on cars, also an issue one year. And the trash, you know, it just builds up, and here it is loose in bags. You know, raccoons get into it, squirrels get into it, and pretty soon it's spread all over the place. One of the aspects of our department is that we inspect a lot of different types of buildings. So restaurants, churches, multifamily homes, fraternities and sororities, and even educational buildings, schools and that type of thing, nursery schools. I have coming up in a couple of weeks, twice a year we do fraternities and sororities. There's 11 actual lettered houses that are recognized by the university and the town. There are quite a few others, members of fraternities and sororities in Amherst, and they often live in neighborhoods in single family or multifamily homes. But these get a real inspection twice a year. So twice a year, I know that those fraternities and sororities meet the minimum for habitation. When we were registering properties, I realized that there were 136 properties that had never been inspected, but should have been. We inspect them twice a year, every 2 years. So a multifamily house is 3 family or more. In my inspections, I discovered 67 fire escapes that also need to be inspected, and that's by a registered engineer. That happens every 5 years. Most of those are certified safe now or in the process of being repaired. Here's a house with it's a 2-family up and down. That's a fire escape off one side of it. You know, I didn't feel like it was safe to escape a blaze, and I didn't feel like it was safe for firefighters to use to get in. That's what it got replaced with. It could be a costly thing when I order these. Here's one right close to the university in the heart of the student housing district. Also, you know, you wouldn't think that it'd be safe to go up and down that, and it got replaced. So we've got some online resources. The town's website has a special page, the rental permitting page, which is the RP/RP. as Charity was talking about, there's access to the town GIS system in there. So you can click on any property in town, enter an address for any property and see what the permitting history is, the complaint history, what kind of violations. There's a map of complaints and violations. So it's got current complaints and violations that are in process and resolved issues, but you can also then expand the map, click on any property and see what's happened there. And there's a way to submit a anonymous electronic complaint. There's the map with the little dots. So the green dots have been resolved. The red dots we're still working, and the blue dots are noise complaints that the police have responded to. As was pointed out before, if you do a little research about a property and you don't get involved in a property that's had a lot of issues, the neighbors get extremely tired of some of these properties, and putting your kid into a situation like that is going to be a nightmare because the neighbors already hate them and they don't know them yet. This is how we've got a station in town hall. Town hall's open to the public again. You can come in, you can do research, you can register your property. There's access to all the data and maps there. Again, viewing that property online. All of the archival records are available. We do some outreach. I work with a team. It's not just me. So I've got another health inspector that I work with. I work with an officer from the Amherst Police Department. He's the neighborhood liaison officer. He has a comfort dog that goes around with him. Often a good way to open a conversation with that dog. We work with the fire department. We have a fire inspector that comes around with us too. We participate in housing fairs. We work closely with UMass staff. We attend community events. We try to create a positive presence in Amherst.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think you did such a good job kind of bridging between the campus community and the off-campus community. And something that I realized I should mention about off-campus student life is, in addition to supporting students finding housing and navigating housing challenges, we really try to do a lot of outreach and education around how do you be a member of this community responsibly. What does it look like to move into a neighborhood where there have been a lot of students in and out? Noise complaints are certainly something we hear a lot about, as well as the other issues John mentioned. So we really try to work with students to develop the skills to communicate well with their neighbors and to ease tension. So one thing we do that might be helpful to pass on to your students is good neighbor registration. So students can register if they're having a gathering. They can register that with our office, and we do a short meeting with them to go over some basics about how to be a good neighbor, how to be respectful if you're hosting something. And then we also then send that information to the dispatch for the town of Amherst or Hadley. And so if a noise complaint comes in about one of those addresses that's registered, dispatch will call them and give them a 20-minute window to kind of shut it down. And so it prevents unnecessary police response and hopefully, teaches students and neighbors about how to coexist. If a second complaint comes in after that 20 minutes, then they do send someone over to respond. But yeah, so just wanted to add a little bit about our other kind of programming and resources.
I'll say a minute, a quick thing too, Charity, about sensitive neighborhoods. The team that I work with, that I mentioned, the police, the fire, and a UMass representative, we meet with incoming students in sensitive neighborhoods. It was over Zoom for the last 2 years, but previously we met in person, and just to lay out what the expectations are. Look at you're living in a neighborhood where there have been problems. The neighbors are on heightened alert, and don't leave your trash cans out at the road. Don't park on the lawn. Try to be quiet and respect your neighbors. You live in a neighborhood. And those meetings are pretty successful.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think one of the strengths of this collaboration and working with you and Bill and the Comfort Dog is that we are able to have a lot of those kinds of proactive and reactive conversations that are really focused on how to do better going forward, how to prevent some issues from reoccurring. And a lot of the students who live off campus are really thoughtful and wonderful and help out their neighbors when they can. And so we also see a lot of great things happening too, we should say. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of all I had. John, do you have anything else before we go to just questions?
Yeah, I was thinking that, one aspect of my job, there's the enforcement piece, but there's also, I can be an advocate for your student renter. If they're having trouble getting something done by their landlord, I have the power to get that done. And many students reach out to me. I take calls all the time, and I can absolutely have an influence on a landlord because I can, I've got the tools. I can threaten to remove their rental permit and usually get some action. So sometimes kids don't want to reach out because they don't want to make any waves, but there's no reason to put up with a landlord who won't respond. We have the tools to get that to happen. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so great. Yeah, I think we know students can be very vulnerable to landlords who are not doing what they're supposed to do because students are doing this for the first time, and it's a huge learning curve. It can feel really intimidating. So definitely working with John and his folks and the Off-Campus Student Center, if any issues are coming up, is really important to just get started early. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Now we'll take questions. I think we have moderators who will help us with that. But yeah, we're happy to answer as many questions as we can before time.
Thank you so much, John and Charity, for this wonderful presentation. Yes, we do have some questions coming from the QA feature, so I will start with that, if you guys don't mind. One for you, Charity, is with the Living Off Campus certification, does the certification last all 4 years, or do you have to renew your certification every year or semester?
You know what? I think it lasts all 4 years. Yeah, I can double check, but I believe it lasts all 4 years. You definitely don't have to do it every semester, and it's not required. It's just highly suggested.
All right, thank you. And John, you talk about minimum standards. Someone wanted to know, what does minimum standards look like?
So it's, all of the codes talk about you can't do less than this. So in terms of, let's see, what are we looking for when we go in? The smoke detectors need to be active. The handrails need to be securely fastened to the walls. The windows all need to have screens in the, from April through October. There's minimum heat standards. The place has got to be capable of being heated. And I found places where the heat didn't work, and the landlord's solution was, well, just put a little electric resistance heater in there. That's not meeting the minimum standards.
Thank you. You have another question. When completing inspection on properties, what exactly is being inspected? Heat system, structural issues, wooden problems, etc.
So we are a complaint-driven department. We aren't doing annual inspections of rental houses currently. We ask that landlords self-certify that their properties are all meeting code minimums. and they sign a form that says they are. If we then go in and find that they aren't, that's when an enforcement happens. So typically someone would invite us in because they're having some kind of an issue with the place. You know, they can't get the heat to work, their refrigerator is broken and the landlord won't replace it, that sort of thing. What are we inspecting? You know, those fire escapes are a good example. That has to be safe. That's how you would get out of the house if there was a fire. Are there two ways out? I've been in houses where students were living in the attic where there's no egress window and no way out. That's not okay. You know, I can't sleep at night thinking about that.
Oh, and is there someone like you in Hadley, John, that takes care of inspection, complaints, and things like that?
No.
All right, and that might be for you, Charity. This one is about insurance, renters insurance. Should students get rental insurance, and how much should they get it for?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know if I'm qualified to answer it. I mean, renter's insurance is great, you know, in providing some protection, but we typically don't, you know, make specific recommendations about this company or that, or how much to get. Yeah, I don't know, John, if you have any experience with that or have anything to add, but
I have seen, you know, situations at rentals where there'll be some kind of a loss. There's, you know, a pipe bursts and all your stuff gets trashed. If you have renter's insurance, that would help with replacement costs. Otherwise, you know, you're just absorbing the loss. Yep.
And how is snow removals handled? Who is ultimately responsible for?
It'll
steps?
say in the lease, but here's how it goes. On a single family or a two-family home, the tenants can be made responsible for doing snow removal. In a bigger place, if it's a three-family and up, it's the landlord's responsibility to do it. In Amherst, there's a lot of single-family rental housing. You know, the economics of it are pretty enticing to landlords, you know, to rent all 4 bedrooms for, you saw what those rents are. I mean, some kids are paying up to $1,000 a bedroom. So, you know, to turn a house into a rental is attractive. And those are houses that aren't really set up for that. And now they want the kids to be responsible for mowing the lawns. And, you know, that's a complaint in the summer. A lot is, it says in the lease that you're supposed to be mowing the lawn. Well, most students go away for the summer. They're not even in Amherst, you know, so then the neighbors complain that the lawn's not getting mowed and the landlord says, well, it's not my thing to do. You know, read your lease.
And Charity, for students that are currently looking for housing, and you mentioned that there are not a lot of options right now. Do you anticipate more to come in the future? When is too late for students?
yeah, I mean, I think it's never technically too late. I mean, because leases can turn over at different times of the year. Complexes can turn over leases as well as independent, you know, privately owned units in, as John was saying, in houses. And so that's why I mentioned sort of being very persistent. It is frustrating if you're not finding things or there are wait lists. So, I mean, we usually see some amount of openings in the summer, even if it's just subleases, sometimes longer though. So I would just say, yeah, continue looking, often set up the alerts. I think last year, because of COVID, there were fewer housing units available, which pushed people to find housing much earlier. And so now that we're in, kind of March or April, it would have been a reasonable time before to find things. Now it's pushing people a little bit and there's less available, unfortunately. So I would also just suggest being open about location, so sometimes students will not be right in Amherst, but Sunderland is super accessible, Hadley, Northampton as well. So being a little bit open to just to kind of exploring, just being mindful about where the bus goes.
And I'm glad you mentioned the bus system as well, because we have a pretty reliable bus system around here. So Northampton is not too far. Hardly, definitely not too far for a student to commute from school to home.
Definitely.
And this is in that same aspect. When should a student start looking for the coming year? Like maybe for the next fiscal year, I would say.
Yeah, I think, a lot of students this year started looking in the mid to late fall. And I think that that's probably not a bad idea. What's hard is we also caution students to be thoughtful about, it's a fine balance. Are you going to be friends with the people that you're signing on to a lease in a year that you are now? And so just weighing the costs of finding somewhere in advance versus also knowing that in a year, what could look different? What will my needs have changed? That kind of thing. So early is good. Early is, preferred, and think about those other factors.
All right. And right now I'm just sharing the screen with everyone. So you get an idea of how the off-campus student life website looks like. So if you're looking for housing, what you're looking for find housing. And then from there, oh, of course, my internet is acting up. But then from there, you will, you'll be able to just sign in with your username and password, your UMass username and password. And then from there, you'll be able to see all of the housing options that are available currently.
Yes, thank you, Rose.
Charity, you didn't say anything about this, but parents should be aware that most of these leases are 12-month leases. Folks aren't here in the summer, but they need to pay rent for that empty house.
Yes, that's a very good point. Right. So sort of, again, thinking about are sublets allowed in wherever I'm signing a lease? If not, what's my plan? Yeah, some places don't allow sublets. So definitely something to consider. And if your student is studying abroad, a similar question.
All right, these are all of the questions we have. So any last minute word of advice do you have for the group?
Good luck, be persistent, call us if you need help. Yeah, we're here to help as much as possible.
There is more housing coming online too. There's a project down at the end of University Drive South that'll be ready in the fall. And there's Spring Street, which is on a pretty fast track. I'm not sure what their completion date is, but that's all going to be housing as well. And they're breaking ground down at 11 East Pleasant for 4 or 5 story building there. So there's a lot more housing units coming online.
Thank you so much, John and Charity. Like I said, for this presentation, we know you're taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. So we truly appreciate your and honored to have you here with us and offer your assistance to us. Thank you, family members, for joining in. I hope this information, as usual, is useful to you. And we hope to see you again on April 20th at 6:30 for our next webinar series, which is about life after UMass for students and families graduating or planning to graduate from UMass soon. If you still have questions concerned about off-campus student life and ways to support your student, feel free to contact the Off-Campus Student Life Center. They are more than happy to assist you. Until we see you again, thank you, stay healthy, and go UMass.